Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights outtake episode, the last third about of the off-topic channel that I was on with Greg Miller and Darren on YouTube. We went about an hour, and the way they asked the last couple of questions, I answered them in a way that's worth posting to my channel, not the whole thing. I encourage you to go listen to those guys regularly. That was fun. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Greg. Oh, almost forgot. Thanks, sponsors, Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Hug the Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentications. Here it is now.
One of your biggest fans is my buddy Mookie Tilson. And what Mookie wants to hear you talk about. He says, I know you're a humble man, but pretend that you've just sworn in as an expert witness at a trial. Is it not the case that the Beckett Price Guide, since first day of publication, has more than 10x'd the hobby?
First of all, I was an expert witness for 6 years, and I made a lot of money testifying in employment discrimination, class actions all over the country. And so I was sworn in all the time, testified 100 times in federal court. Never was asked this question, Mookie. Of course, it wasn't relevant to the employment practices of government agencies or large companies I was testifying about. Okay, so I'm under oath here. The hobby 10x'd, and I was catalytic. I don't think I was necessarily the prime mover, but I was very involved, and our price guide's more than 10x'd. So I'm not taking credit for it as much as I was there. I was involved. I was a catalyst. I wanted it to happen, and I wanted to do my best. Like I said, a lot of great help, and I probably caught the wave, but the hobby needed a price guide that was widely accepted to grow. I think that was my position. That's why I worked so hard on it.
But I think part of the reason the wave was so big was because of the Beckett Price Guide. That helped the swell because it needed that. And you're a big person who's about terminology and what does this do? And the hobby needed structure. It would have been the Wild West. To some extent, it feels that way right now. But the price guide gave it structure and it gave it parameters, and it prevented people from getting ripped off. Because I've had a lot of experiences, and I have friends had experiences. They would go to a show and they'd say, I'll give you this much for this card. They'd try to sell to a dealer, and the kid would say, but it says in the Beckett it's worth $100. Why are you offering me 10? It protected a lot of people. And by keeping people from getting burned, I think that it had a lot to do with the 10X, personally.
Well, we were part of catching a great wave. When I first started out, there were dealers that said, you're killing me. You're going to kill the hobby. If everybody knows what cards are worth, how are dealers going to make money? So you'd be surprised. If you price things reasonably and you have a lot more customers, the supply is the supply and demand is going to increase, I think you're going to do fine. So I had to lean into the criticism. The second question Mookie has is about hobby terminology. And if you look at all those early magazines, for sure, and even in the price guide books, the annual books that came out all those years, there was usually some kind of a glossary in there. Here's the problem that occurs now. If you've listened to some of my recent podcasts over the last few months, is that the hobby terms that had widespread understanding at the time are being redefined. So if I were to publish an online hobby glossary, would it be circa 1995 or circa 20, the new definitions that some of the hobby influencers want to have? And the definitions can evolve. To me, it ought to be expert driven more than popularity driven. There ought to be some combination of that, because the hobby terms, if they get too complicated, it puts people off, or if they're self-serving. Mookie is giving me assignment. I am refusing it.
But Dr. Beckett, you just said literally, and I quote 3 minutes ago, we need new terminology.
Yeah, it's somebody else to do that.
But it's not you.
Like I said, the problem is going to be there's a moving target. Victor Roman is trying to come up with the rookie card, quote unquote, rules or guidelines, and he can't get agreement on that. So, guys, you were there. It was simpler in those days. It's not simple anymore. Every hobby glossary term that I thought I knew, a lot of them have been challenged now, just because the card companies challenge it. One of the things they've done, and it's with Caitlin Clark and Wemby for sure, is they've extended the season of producing cards from about 6 months during season, beginning and end of season, to about 18 months. There's still 23-24 product coming out after 24-25 product is already out. That didn't happen in those days. So now you can't just look on the back and see what season you can, but there frequently is more to it.
Yeah.
So it's very tricky.
Mookie's last question. Dr. B, you're always so welcoming to different voices and different opinions from the hobby and different people in the hobby. Where and how did you learn to be that way?
I'm married to a really smart woman. That helps. And I'm the oldest of 5 when I was growing up. So I have 4 sharp younger siblings. My parents really promoted open, civil, courteous discussion at the dinner table. We had family dinners and talked about a lot of interesting things. I've said this about other people, but it's true about me. I can make decisions that are never wrong considering the facts that I have. If you give me a set of facts, then I will make the right decision, assuming there's no additional facts out there. So that's part of discussion and open discourse, is to figure out, does Mookie or Darren or Graig know something that I don't know that would affect my decision? That's why when we were starting the company, and even when I did the surveys and I did the annual price guides and the monthly price guides, is that I know what I've seen, but I have not seen it all. I've seen a lot of it. Maybe I've seen 80 or 90% of it, but I haven't seen it all. So to be able to be in discussion with somebody who says, you haven't been to a single show in the state of Maine. That's correct. I've not been to a show in the state of Maine. And here's how it goes in Maine. So, okay, well, thank you for that information. It may not change anything, but the price guide wouldn't have grown if I'd have been a czar. I wasn't a czar. In fact, some of these decisions I made, they were based on the evidence, opinions, stated and otherwise, of people in the hobby that were highly respected. I wasn't taking a vote, but it was almost like there was a Senate and a House of Representatives, and the dealers were the Senate and the collectors were the House of Representatives. We wanted to make sure both of them had a voice, because they both had to accept it. If they wouldn't have, it'd be a different world we're living in.
Card grading. I've always liked the very solid Beckett slabs and how the cards look in them. Can you explain why Beckett slabs don't get the respect they once had in the hobby, with values of cards in Beckett holders selling for sometimes far less than PSA and even less than SGC? I'd be interested in Dr. Beckett's views on grading. Specifically, how does he think uniformity in grading standards could be accomplished? And does he think it would have value? I look at your wall behind you, a 49-leaf Jackie there. You got a Brooks Robinson rookie. You got some amazing stuff. And they're all in Beckett slabs. Why are Beckett slabs not getting the premium that they once did, in your opinion?
Okay, I'm going to just say this, but I'm not saying it about me. It's just that I haven't been there for 19 years. And there's been a series of leadership changes, some of which were good, some of which were not so good. I had no control over that, but there's been a lack of continuity. There was huge continuity when I was the boss, because I was the owner, I was the boss. I'd been a collector, I'd been a dealer. So that's different. But I sold, and the new owners then sold, and then there's been a succession of leadership changes. I think that's hurt the brand, that lack of continuity. Secondly, I think there was a hiccup at COVID, and when PSA shut down, I believe that BGS erroneously followed suit. I know I saw the huge backlog, but that was a big momentum loser. SGC didn't do that, so that was a second thing. Thirdly, I'm not blaming Ryan Stasinski, but there's been conflict with Jim Rate and Ryan, who I think is a good guy, but I don't think there's been full cooperation there. And what that does is every month it looks like BGS is bringing up the rear. I don't think they are, but I can't prove it. So that makes the perception that it's going down, and it affects the demand for the slabs, even though the slab is very secure. All the positives we engineered into it. The slab, I think, is better. The inner sleeve, the report card, the subgrades. There's so many positives there. And even Pristine 10 and Black Label 10. Those were innovations, and they're still well received in one sense, but we've lost out for 2 reasons. Beyond those others, is that the simplicity of a PSA 10 being gem mint is hard to beat, considering they were the incumbent, they were the first ones there, they have a huge market share, they always have, and they have the registry. So, like I say, the lack of continuity of leadership, BGS has not been pressing forward to emphasize the advantages. Consequently, there's some discontinuities in the pricing in the marketplace where there's some savvy people out there buying up all the 9.5 BGSs and quietly crossing them over. Now, you got to crack them because PSA is not going to give them 10s normally unless you crack it and make it look like it's a brand new submission. But that's easy money. You pick out a well-centered BGS 9.5 that has got something on the surface that's just microscopic or an edge that is imperceptible to the human eye. BGS, they're strict graders.
Why do you think subgrades didn't catch on? The subgrades are brilliant, and subgrades are fantastic for the submitter. At least there's some sort of answer as to why it got what it got. And as you're a collector, you can go, oh, I don't really care that much about corners. I care about centering, and the centering is a 10. There are things about it that are just fantastic. Was there proprietary rights by Beckett on that? Why didn't the others steal that idea? Because it's a great idea.
It's costly, Greg. It's costly, Darren. It slows up the process. It requires greater attention to each card. That's why we were, and I think still are, the most thorough graders, because we got 4 things we've got to get right instead of just, hey, it looks like a 9 to me. So I'm not saying other people do that, but so it costs, but subgrades originally were highly appreciated by a large portion of the people. The first 5 years of our existence, when I was there, every year when I was there, we won the award for the best grading service. And we were never grading more than PSA, but we were held in high esteem. And with the leadership changes, then they all of a sudden now you've got an option. You don't have to do the subgrades if you don't want them. You can save money on that. And so it's brought some market confusion there. But I'm big on it, Greg. I agree with you. It's more information. PSA is now going to give you some greater notes and tag as more definitive stuff. But to me, that's the way it's got to go. Just like in the price guide, I'm trying to create a level playing field where people can not be taken advantage of. Because again, all BGS 9s are not fungible. All PSA 9s are not fungible. And we know that there's weak ones, strong ones. But BGS is the only one where the layperson could figure it out. Hey, this is a better 9.5 because it's quad 9.5s instead of 2 9.5s and a couple of 9s or whatever the weaker one would be.
When Beckett hit the scene, they had the premium. I remember the Beckett 9.5 sold for more than the PSA 10. That isn't the case anymore. Your reasoning and explanation makes sense to me. Great insight and explanation. You said market confusion. I wonder sometimes the BG, the BVG, the BCCG, did that create some confusion on they're different, and the BCCG is clearly different than BGS and BVG, but do you think that caused confusion for collectors? And were you around when that decision was made?
It did create confusion for collectors. It wasn't confusion for dealers. The dealers got it. They said BVG, that's for vintage, and BCCG, that's for bulk kind of stuff for a few mega dealers that had very large quantity and couldn't sell anything that wasn't a 10 or maybe a 9. So to keep our integrity, we made 10 be a mint or better. So we could zip through them because they were not paying very much, but it was huge volume from some of the big names in the hobby. And the BVG was branded differently because we thought there was some perception in the marketplace, and I think we were correct, that vintage cards were graded a little bit different, a little bit more leniently. I think that still is the case, and yet the hobby doesn't want that. They just want one grade. So our intentions were good, but it was confusing. In fact, I'll even amend it a little bit. It wasn't confusing to veteran collectors. It was confusing to new collectors. And that's where BGS has had a problem, is they're not converting the new collectors. Unless they live in Dallas or in this area, they go to Kyle's show, the Waters Creek Plano show, and they're just doing big business there because they turn it around. And so they're still doing fine. I don't mind being number 2. When we were number 2, we were still a market leader in many respects. We weren't the market volume leader, but I thought we were the thought leader. We couldn't catch up on the registry, and their 10 is a 10. Who cares what the words are? 10 is gem mint. Our 9.5 is gem mint. Yeah, the knowledgeable people when the hobby was smaller and clustered and our magazines were so widely available, those first 5 or 6 years before I was gone, there was no problem with that. But it's been 19 years.
There's speculation about Fanatics getting involved in maybe SGC, and then SGC was acquired by Collectors. Is there a conflict of interest going on there? It's getting a little bit more political. What do you think would be the right move for Beckett Grading, BGS? Would it be to get under the umbrella of a big company, infuse some money and marketing into it, or is it to continue to be a standalone and ride it out and reestablish itself as a premier grader?
I really can't answer that, Craig. I'm not in charge, and it would be undermining them for me to say what I think even there, because they're going to make the best decision based on the stakeholders, not just the ownership. Hopefully they're looking at the full landscape of how I want the brand to flourish. And it's not fully flourishing right now, and they ought to make some changes. I do, however, want to make a big distinction between conflict of interests that people seem to worry about in the hobby when those conflicts are not in the least bit illegal. So if it's not illegal, when BGS or Beckett as an entity is considering their future, I don't think conflict of interest is an issue as much as when PSA bought SGC, maybe to keep Fanatics from buying them. If Fanatics would have bought them, some people would have been upset about that. But what if Fanatics bought, again, a conflict of interest is not illegal. What PSA did when they bought SGC, they said, we're going to give them some best practices, but they're going to run it as a standalone thing. Otherwise, there's a conflict of interest there too. They can work things back and forth. That Wilt Chamberlain, it was a 10 SGC.
Yeah.
All of a sudden now it's a 10 PSA. Sister brother company. Okay. As long as there's nothing illegal, then I don't worry about the conflicts of interest that are more perceived, that somehow Fanatics, if they owned BGS or SGC or anybody, that their cards would get preferred treatment. That would undermine both brands. So conflicts of interest, there's always the worry about it, but in practice, if you don't have integrity, then you're going to be in trouble, both businesses. And for Fanatics, branding is everything. They've got apparel, they're going to have gambling, they got all this stuff. They need to be making sure everything is done just right. I'm not going to predict, but I do think, I'm hoping it has a great future. But I think I can say this, it's not a great future business as usual, doing what they've been doing. They need a discontinuity in their favor. Something that's either a marketing thing or product thing or something. And I was a leader. We can't do business as usual. We've got to have something that gets the attention of the people, that provide them some good reasons to give us their business. That's how I grew the company, is take away the hurdles and give them reasons that they can make money legally and consistently, and we're going to be around. The Beckett brand, it's just the diamond in the rough all of a sudden.
Now, you said a second ago, and 100%, this business is about integrity. And everything I've ever heard you say, everything I've ever seen you do, you are all about integrity. I don't think that has ever been in question. When Apple was struggling years ago, what did they do? They went back to Steve Jobs. They dusted him off. They said, help us with some ideas. We need some help.
Make it look like I've got my black turtleneck.
There you go, your black turtleneck.
He did. And he came back. And that's when Apple went to the moon again. Yeah. After success, failure, success. Would you ever consider them bringing you in for a short period of time to captain the ship for a moment?
No, I can't be the captain. I'm not the boss anymore. In fact, I've got to be careful because Kevin is my friend and I cast a long shadow, guys. It's not fair. I was up at the office last month before doing other stuff. I give my opinions when they're asked, but I've got to be careful. They paid for the right, the owners did, to run the business they want to run it. I want to be available to them, that if they have a question before they make a decision, that I'm available for free. After the decision, if they want me to help clean up the mess, I'll also do that for free. But I'd rather give some insights. I've done a lot of things in the industry, and I'm not completely over the hill. I'm enjoying doing my podcast, but I don't want a full-time job. In fact, the podcast was starting to be like a full-time job, and I was doing one every day. So now 3 times a week, I'm just loafing.
The man in the house who